One of the most important things and, really what gives people great outcomes are when instead of suppressing what their gut is trying to say, they actually listen and they lean in.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dr. Drew Ramsey podcast. I am so happy that you're back talking about mental health and mental fitness with us. We are going to get right back into gut health because we know how important that is to mental fitness. Nutritional psychiatry, eating for our mental health is a new idea, and really one of those pillars of mental fitness. So we've got a wonderful integrative gastroenterologist and friend, Dr. Elena Ivanina. Most recently and really excitingly, she started the Center for Integrative Gut Health in New York City to focus on personalized medicine and optimizing protocols for gut health. So many folks are struggling with everything from IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, to reflux, to just questions. What do we do to take care of our microbiome these days? What do I eat for optimal mental health, optimal health? What should I do about probiotics? So we're going to get into all of those questions. Now, why Dr. Ivanina? Well, she's quadruple board certified, internal medicine, gastroenterology, preventative medicine, and obesity medicine. And also, we have been colleagues. We know each other really first on social, but we've been supporting one another. My brain love emoji kind of sign off is very inspired by her gut love emoji sign off. So I really, it's a treat to have you here. All right. Well, I want to get into my nitty gritty questions. Everybody who's been listening along, we've had some gastroenterologists on, and I realized that I wanted to zoom in on right away on one of the big questions that I'm finding in integrative gastroenterology and just health in general. Help me understand probiotic pills compared to fermented foods. All the time I'm getting the question what to do, and I always recommend fermented foods. However, most of what's studied, I think, is probably more probiotics, but they feel different to me. Can you explain it in your mind about the difference?
Absolutely. And you are completely right to recommend fermented food. You can't go wrong with food as your base, right? People have been fermenting food, for ages. It's a very actually ancient process because it actually helps preserve food. And that's why people started doing it. And now, of course, fermented food and cultured food. So, fermented food mostly being sauerkraut, kimchi, tempeh, and things like that. And then, of course, cultured foods such as yogurt, they have very specific strains in them, right? So when you look at like a tub of yogurt, you see that there's a specific lactobacillus strain, specific bifidobacterial strain. So they are very, they have a couple strains in them, which is, again, like if you're looking to just increase your general gut health for increased diversity of your microbiome, it is always a great idea to eat fermented and cultured food. Now, the other thing to think about is that we're learning more and more about how it's important to eat prebiotics with probiotics or take prebiotics with probiotics as a supplement, because the prebiotics are literally, if you choose the right ones, are feeding the probiotics. So they actually end up colonizing your gut. And that's what you want. You don't want that fleeting probiotic to go right through. You want it to actually set up shop, produce its metabolites, and have a real lasting effect. So again, you can't go wrong with fermented food. That should be something that's part of everybody's ideally daily consumption. Probiotics, when you get into supplements, that's where you can get really into the nitty gritty of what you're taking, how much you're taking, and for what reason. So when I think of supplementing probiotics, I think of that more as medicine. That is like microbiome manipulation, microbiome medicine. So you are taking a certain strain that has been evidence-based to have a particular outcome, and then in a certain quantity, the CFUs that you can measure. So again, very useful, especially in this day and age of increasing our knowledge about the impact of microbiome medicine. So both ways are important and have a little bit of a different purpose.
I think one of the reasons I've gotten really confused, but still trying to figure it out, was the Stanford trial that came out a couple of years ago. It was Christopher Gardner's group looking at fermented foods versus probiotics. And one of the things that struck me was that the changes in diversity weren't the probiotics that were getting consumed. For example, in mental health, Bacillus rhamnosus, I think, is the one that has kind of been focused on. And it's not really clear in the clinical practice, whether there's anything actually to that. And then I get a little concerned of, okay, if I'm recommending, probiotics with Bacillus rhamnosus, let's say, um, if that's not necessarily what's growing, I guess I'm wondering, in your mind, how do we understand the correlation between what we're eating and what's changing in terms of the diversity of our microbiome?
Sure. I mean, I think that it's a good question. And then a lot of the science right now is in its infancy. So it is hard to, again, like if there's a study that comes out looking at like one particular strain and an association with, improving anxiety, or that there's a depletion in Lactobacillus bifidobacterium and a correlation with major depression, right? We're not there yet in a lot of cases to say, okay, well then that's it. You should take that one strain and right, like as you were saying, like what's the utility? So I think that when you're getting, again, sometimes when you're consuming these probiotics in food, the question is, as with again with all of these, how much is actually surviving your gut? How much is surviving the acid of your stomach? How much of that actual strain? Or is it also that you're just getting some of the benefits, some of the metabolites or the postbiotics? So, I think that's one of the questions, that when you're eating, food, is it a direct like one-to-one correlation of you eat Lactobacillus acidophilus and you have this like perfect increased rise in Lactobacillus
That's what I
acid?
wanted. That's what I wanted. I wanted to eat the yogurt, have the special yogurt microbiome, and
Right.
then like have eternal happiness, youth, all the stuff. And I'm disappointed. That's why that's not how it works. But I love us getting into the details, and so everyone listening, we get the terminology right, and make sure I'm getting it right. So probiotics are living organisms in fermented food or in probiotic supplements. Prebiotics are the food for those, which are fibers that, as you noted, we could take as a fiber supplement, or we can eat as foods. And we know some of those insoluble fibers, I always see Jerusalem artichoke hearts, for example, or
Oh,
onions are on
yum.
the list that are particularly good types
Inulin.
of fibers.
Mhm.
And then postbiotics, which is a great phrase, and that is what the organisms make.
Mhm.
And so they do a lot of things while they're down there. They make vitamins like vitamin K2 or even a little vitamin B12, but they make short chain fatty acids that feed the inner lining of the colon. And so those are some of the terms we're hearing. A symbiotic is the other one, where we're seeing combinations of prebiotics and postbiotics. I always tell my children this meal is symbiotic, and they roll their eyes, because if you put, a fermented food with some plants, that is the original symbiotic meal. But
Absolutely.
um, can we get into smart moves? Because a lot of times we focus on the problems, the culprits, and I feel like everybody listening maybe needs a little pat on the back around the smart moves maybe they're making. And I'm wondering, when patients come in to see you, what are the best kind of smart moves that you see people making about their gut health?
Sure. I think that one of the most important things, and really what gives people great outcomes, are when, instead of suppressing their gut, what their gut is trying to say, they actually listen and they lean in. And what I mean by that is, we live in this world where it's like, oh, my stomach hurts, let's take a PPI. Oh, I have, right, like I have a cramp, let me take this anti-spasmodic, medication. And so most, as in our society, we're constantly basically trying to just band-aid, band-aid, band-aid. And so I think that one of the most important tools that we have in our tool shed of reconnecting with our gut health, so we can better understand our own gut and how it responds to different stimuli and different variables, is really listening. And so I feel like it's something that everyone can do today, like without having to spend any money. You just, like, when your gut is telling you something, when it's sending you a signal, when you're having a symptom, journal, right? It's like that, the insight that you get from journaling, understanding what your gut is trying to say, and then making connections by speaking with a practitioner or putting them together yourself so that you can make these wise decisions that don't lead you down the path of very restrictive diets, but lead you in the path of very specific changes that are really just for you and your gut. And that's what I love to hear when people do things like that.
So it's where when we have something's happening with our gut, maybe not just saying this is a symptom, I have some diarrhea or some cramping or some bloating, like let me get rid of that. But
Yeah.
we're looking for something, we're wanting to find some language. When we're journaling about our gut,
Mhm.
are there certain prompts that are helpful or you find people kind of gets them into the right stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there are, like the prompts or the things that I like people to think about are, again, obviously there's a clear like abdominal pain, but there's also, what are, we get into the nitty gritty of your Bristol stool score, right? Like how your stool looks,
Oh,
and
what my stool has a
it
score,
has a
doctor?
score.
I'm just gotten over all my neuroses about schools and grades just a few months ago. I just gonna come back to what's this?
Here's a new one. Here's a new one. So the idea is that, so we can be on the same page when talking about your bowel movements, which tell you so much. It's like the eyes are the window to your soul. It's like your bowel movements are the window to your gut health. Uh,
I mean, that's true. Anybody who's into health, gut health, we all look, right? And I think
Mhm.
uh, maybe we should get rid of the I don't know stigma about that or jokes about that it's gross but it's important. It's diagnostic. It tells you a lot about whether you make the right choices or not.
Exactly. So this Bristol stool scale, for example, is, it's a scale from 1 to 7, where 1 is this hard pellet stool. Then you go down to 4, which is your perfect banana. And then you go down to 7, which is complete water. And it's, again, a nice way for if you are journaling, you can just put, okay, today's a 4, yes, versus, okay, today is a 7. What did I eat? Becoming,
Hmm.
leading up to this, what happened? Did I have stress? Did I have some kind of meeting or presentation, right? Or there's so many things. Like that's the other important thing about journaling, right? Is that it's not only your gut symptoms because there are so many other connections. It's how was your brain fog, or how was your anxiety that day, or how was your sleep, right? Like when you journal, it's so important to journal in this more holistic way.
I love it. So thinking really about, starting kind of with, how's the stool doing? How's the output? But then investigating a little like, where's this coming from, do you think? Are there emotions going on? Were there stressors? Were there maybe different foods that were eaten, but also were there different emotions or things that come to mind as you're sitting to journal and relating that to some of the gut health? So it's not just what we eat, but also a variety of other things that are affecting the quality of our digestion and gut health.
Absolutely, right? So many other things other than what you put in your gut, which is food, medications, right? We always forget that's going in our gut too, right? Food, medications, anything that goes in our gut, but all those external stimuli.
Gotcha. Well, I want to hear a couple of other smart moves, like things like I don't know, oatmeal in the morning.
Oh,
Are you a
sure.
fan of some
Yeah.
of some of these things? What I come in, I tell you that I take Metamucil 5 times a day. I mean, I bet you think that maybe isn't so smart, but what are some real smart moves? I say lentils all the time.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, so love sprouted lentils. People, there are a lot of people that come in and they even, my patients are very, very smart. I feel like they're always introducing me to new things that are out there because the
It's
market is
all the
constantly,
patients now,
right?
Dr. Elena. I mean, they have the internet and chat GPT. I mean, it's like
True.
I call it collaboration, just so it's really clear. Like, I know you have the internet.
Yeah.
I know you can
That's true.
understand the, P450 enzymatic breakdown of this medicine just as well as I can.
Yeah,
So,
right, exactly. So many resources now, right, available to everyone, which is great, but also a little dangerous sometimes. But absolutely. So things I love when people have found things like sprouted lentils, right? Lentils are difficult to digest. A lot of people have issues with lentils, but if they're sprouted, well cooked, you cook them with kombu, people telling me that, that plus, having something like onions and rice. What a great way, right, to have this kind of fiber packed meal that will just completely boost all your short chain fatty acids and anti-inflammatory properties, right, that are coming from your gut microbiome. So absolutely, I'm a huge fan of lentils and beans. Smart moves
And the
definitely.
sprouting, and we just do that, like, because I just kind of cook them well. But the
Mhm.
sprouting, do I kind of like spread them out on a paper towel and mist them a little bit, or
So
buy them sprouted?
as a owner of my own business and a mom of two kids, I wish I could give you all the details of how to sprout at home, but I'm going to tell you that you can buy them sprouted
There
already.
we go. No, that's good. That's a good answer. I think
Yeah,
everybody likes the answer, like, could do it at home,
you
but buy
could.
them sprouted and then it's available. But I think it's just I'm not as familiar. I always just get the dried ones, and the sprouted ones are right there next to it. They've just maybe been sprouted and then dried again, is what they do.
Yep, exactly. So even when you look at them, you can see that it's like the little lentil with that little
Huh.
sprout coming out. Yeah, so I think they have it available with lentils, black beans, a whole bunch of legumes now, as they understand that process does increase the digestibility.
It makes so much sense for everybody when a little seed starts to sprout, and you can, I imagine, as like the little gears start to turn
Mhm.
and everything gets kind of liberated, meaning
Yeah.
all the minerals that it's hanging on to, it sort of shifts the types of proteins, it gets ready to grow,
Mhm.
and then you eat it.
Mhm.
And that in doing that, it really creates in some ways a little bit of a different type of food. And so if
Mhm.
in the great grain debate, which ever persists, I always think
Mhm.
sprouted grains is like one of those ace cards that you can. It's like fermented dairy. Who can
Yeah.
argue against that? It's like maybe you don't like dairy, but fermented
Ferment,
dairy.
yeah.
All right, so more sprouted grains, especially if you've maybe had some problems. You heard a
Mhm.
talk, and Ramsey said lentils, 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 and didn't you got maybe some bloating, some cramping? Think about maybe sprouted lentils or
Mhm.
eating fewer of them. Other ways, and I guess particularly ways you see people adding in fermented foods or adding in plants and fiber that really excite you. You think are really smart.
Sure, of course. I mean, I think that the one of the best ways to really I guess there are two things that I think get people very excited. The first one is growing your own food, right? So when you start a garden and you're actually growing your own food, I think that you can connect with that food to a level that's never happened before, right? You really understand where it's come from, you've tended to it, right? You've protected it from insects, you've guarded this food, and it's local, it's seasonal. The nutrients are so fresh, everything is there. It hasn't been shipped across the country. So I think that if possible, and again, even if you have some kind of indoor potters, plant potting system,
Is
or
this what I mean? As you said, you're New York City physician, mother of two. Do you have like a little basil plant or rosemary? How do you do any of that?
well, I did move to the suburbs, so I did acquire a little more space. So
You
I
don't need
have
much.
been I've been dabbling in having some tomatoes. Tomatoes take up a lot of space, right? Mint takes up a lot of space. So now I'm able to really start experimenting, and I think it just gives me such a new appreciation, and I'm excited to use the things that I've grown, and my kids are excited, Drew, right? Even more, even better. Who cares about me anymore? My kids are really excited for these things. They pick them, they water them, and then they come up with different recipes, which is amazing because we know a kid's microbiome is where we need to start our work.
Love it. I really like this suggestion. It's one that I make a lot as somebody who grew up on a farm and moved back to
Mhm,
our farm and have
mhm.
grown a lot of food. And I love the way you put it, especially that protecting it from insects. That was always the really hard part for me.
Yeah.
Earlier, when I had an episode with Ben Hartman, who has a great book about micro farming and lean farming. So anybody, if you just have a little yard or a tiny
Mhm.
amount of space, we really recommend that podcast, and also some of his techniques, because on his, I think he's just an acre. He's feeding hundreds of families, and so you don't need
Wow.
to grow that much food. But
Yeah.
what Dr. Ivanina is saying really resonates with me, and I hope resonates with you. If you don't have that kind of relationship with food, and I find a lot of people don't, they say either they can't grow stuff, or I really recommend anything. even just a basil plant. One of my patients is a little angry at me right now because I keep recommending basil plants, but it's because I really believe in the power of pesto. I mean, but
Yes.
basil plants, even the ones in the store, right, where you can buy it still alive, it's
Yeah.
just really a wonderful note for everybody to sort of sit with and wonder, what can you be growing a little bit of, in the way that imbues food with a little bit more for all of us. Well, let's get into the common problems and culprits that you're seeing. As an integrative gastroenterologist, you really, in some ways, are seeing a lot of traditional problems. You're seeing a lot of concerns where people have tried many different things. What are some of the common culprits that you're seeing, things that we really should be avoiding that are causing us problems?
Sure. I think that one of the culprits that may not be at the top of everyone's radar, that I think is really contributing to the gut health issues that many people are experiencing, are our standard Western diet and the amount of sugar, right? We know there's a lot of fructose, there's a ton of added sugar that is contributing to, of course, like metabolic health issues that we are all aware of. But what we may not be aware of so much are how those persistently elevated glucose levels, prediabetes and diabetes, really affect gut health, right? So for example, we know that, again, glucose elevations in the blood can cause toxicity basically to nerves, right? And so our gut is full of nerves, as we know. It's got its own enteric nervous system, but it's got, sensory nerves, it's got motor nerves. And so you think about the damage that can be done to the motor nerves, specifically decreasing or sometimes increasing motility. And again, when people are struggling with understanding their gut symptoms, they usually don't think about these things, right? The motility. The first thing you think of is, okay, let's make sure it's not cancer. Let's make sure it's not Crohn's, ulcerative colitis. But then you have everybody else who's left suffering with these chronic gut issues on a daily basis that really, decrease their quality of life. So again, one of the things that I see as we practice in this society that's so heavily sugar based is that there's a lot of damage to the gut motility and dysbiosis from added sugar. And not only that, but we know that again, having diabetes is a way that your immune system really decreases. It's basically a type of immunodeficiency, and it feeds processes like candida. And so I've seen, just again, I think it's a simple thing to think about because I think we see it everywhere. Okay, like the standard American diet, and it's just another reason, but we just don't talk about it as much of how it affects our gut specifically. And so it's probably one of the more common things that I'm seeing.
Wow. So, really, not just thinking about these traditional neuropathies that people see with high blood sugar, some numbness in the fingers or tingling or problems with eyesight. I hadn't really thought about it until I saw some of your posts, and it just makes sense. These are little tiny, tiny nerve fibers. And we always talk about the brain gut connection and, how it's the second brain,
Yeah.
but we often don't think about protecting those neurons, and
Hmm.
that, just like high blood sugar, it is not great for nerve health.
Hmm.
That affects motility. It's a really, especially if you're having motility problems or
Yeah.
challenges, things moving too fast or too slow, you're
Hmm.
struggling with blood sugar. Maybe that's another way to kind of motivate, to really take great care of it, because it can improve digestion.
Exactly.
Um, Speaking of maybe recovery, or people maybe taking initial steps, especially if folks are struggling a little bit with gut health, are there some safe foods that you like, that you feel most digestive systems can handle? I know it's hard to generalize, especially when people have a lot of different intolerances. But let's say someone who doesn't have a lot of intolerances, but they've just been a little off. Maybe they've had a little bit of diarrhea. Nothing concerning from a GI perspective. When you think about kind of resetting or a protocol to
Hmm.
help them get back to health, what do you go to?
Absolutely. So I think it is, it's a really nice concept to allow the gut to rest a little bit, right? So if you've gone through either an illness, or again, or you just ate wrong, or you had too much alcohol, and that disrupted your gut health, whatever caused the diarrhea. And then now you're left with this, possibly some pain, and again, like abnormal bowel movements, which can also be very uncomfortable. The first thing I would say is you kind of pull back and you think about doing something that's simple and nourishing, like miso soup. I love miso. That's probably the first thing I recommend people, like when they're, again, especially after an infection, that they bring back, right? Miso soup, because it is a probiotic. It's a fermented soy, but it's also so easy to digest. It's very gentle. There are few people I've ever met who cannot tolerate miso soup. And
Oh, I
then,
love this. I love this answer because oftentimes, a lot of folks listening, especially if you're deep in the wellness world, people, have strong opinions about soy
boy,
and
mhm,
strong, and being a fermented bean, it's, it's really great to hear you talking about how it's so digestible. I also think it's one of those foods that people don't buy a lot of. I'd never
right.
bought miso before I got into this. And so
Mhm.
if people want to make miso soup at home, can you just quickly, where do they find it? What do they do?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because most of the time when we think of miso soup, we think of that really hot plastic container that you get from your Japanese takeout, right? And I hate that, right? Because you just think about this hot plastic container with all the chemicals like leaching into your miso soup. So I love that we're talking about this, because the better way to do it is to purchase a tub of miso paste. And there's so many different types, right? The red miso, like really different. You can really become like a miso connoisseur. Like there's a lot of different types of miso. And you honestly, you just would take like basically a tablespoon and put it into warm water, dissolve it, and then, to taste, right? Because you can make it basically as salty or less salty as you'd like. And then you can put in some seaweed, put in some little enoki mushrooms, put in whatever else you'd like, right? One of the other safety foods I was going to say, like as you're recovering from diarrhea, that I think is really nice is rice. Obviously stemming from the brat diet, which, has endured so many years in the medical community because it works, right?
Tell,
Rice
tell
is part of.
everybody, tell everybody about the brat diet, just for the
Oh, yes.
uninitiated. What's the brat diet?
So the Brad diet is what we are all taught in medical school to use for people who are having acute diarrhea, which is basically bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast. And so I think that we can kind of, some of the things that I've kind of built on the Brad diet is, first of all, the bananas have to be unripened. If you're doing very ripe bananas, which are much higher in starch, much higher in FODMAPs and fermentable carbohydrates, you are not going to feel as good introducing that banana. So you want a greener banana, right? Rice
Great
is,
tip.
the rice is an easy one. Just white rice is great. Some people are, I feel like there's, a question about white rice. Is it good for you? Is it not, right? But again, just like the same thing with soy, people are, living the longest lifespan in countries in Asia eating rice and soy products.
It's a great version of where the westernized version of something isn't very healthy. Whether it's bread and pasta from Italy, they do a little better with it in Italy than we do, or rice from cultures like China or India, or the same type of health effects really mostly stemming from the Western diet, not the white rice. And of course, in the wellness world, the debate, white or brown, white or brown. It's like, I think people aren't eating enough rice and vegetables,
Yeah,
and
eat
it's
them
a great way
all.
to eat vegetables. It's a nice. Okay, so greenish or not fully ripe bananas, rice, applesauce is just like sugar sauce is good for my gut.
Right? I mean, again, ideally, it's kind of like a applesauce 2024, or as I'd like to say, gut love approved applesauce would be you taking that apple, you baking that apple, and then you putting that apple in a blender. And, you can get, again, anytime that you are cooking some, difficult to digest carbohydrate, that will make it more digestible. If you again pulverize it and and put it in a blender, that again is going to also help with digestion. So I think that you will get a more delicious and definitely more nutritious applesauce if you do it yourself.
Can you recommend toast in 2024? I mean, that's so hard. Is this going to ruin our careers on the internets? I mean,
I can. Oh, I have so many shout outs in New York City. How about some nice gluten-free, let's see, sourdough from either Needed Love or 16 Mills, some nice local bread bakers. Oh my goodness, incredible toast that they make.
All right. Well, I like this. If we're gonna go toast, which I'm glad to hear because that's a part of my diet. Everyone is probably at this point upping the nutrient density of our bread, looking for a fermented product, looking for something where we're supporting a local baker, which is really, I think, all of us listening, right? We love our local bakeries. That place. I mean, I know croissant is not the healthiest thing. That's fine because they're amazing, along with all the great rye breads and sourdough breads in ways that when you have a great local baker, you see their creativity and experimentation on hand in a way that I think is very inspiring for communities that sometimes maybe doesn't get emphasized enough. They're trying stuff,
Yeah.
and it's really fun to be a part of that. I feel like we get that these days in all the local breweries, but not maybe emphasized as much to the local bakeries. But all the fun ways you can use wheat.
Yeah. It's all about building community, right? Also around, healthy habits and having those people that you have a relationship with. That part is so important.
Well, speaking of community, and since we're here talking about mental health and mental fitness, I wonder if there are some communities when people are struggling with chronic gut conditions that you think are particularly helpful, or ways that when people are struggling with gut health that you kind of see community working for them.
Sure. So I think that, I mean, the communities, there are, of course, different groups that people can join. And I would say, like, a lot of people, of course, find it helpful to hear other people's experiences who are going, who have gone through what they're going through. And so it's interesting. There's some, for example, yoga studios. I'm a huge fan of yoga and the gut, I was going to say gut brain connection effect, but really just mind body. I mean, the whole thing, right? That you can get with yoga. And so there are like some yoga studios that will have these kind of gut directed classes, or, there are definitely some support groups that exist for different GI conditions, especially if you're going through like some societies, which are nice. So instead of just joining a Facebook group and just hearing about that one person's terrible, experience, because when you go on the internet, it's usually the people who have not had a good experience, who have not been helped yet, right? That are out there. So instead, like, seek local groups that are, tailored to what you're going through.
Yeah, and I think also sometimes with local groups, you get that in-person IRL support. There's something that's great about all of the digital support that we can get, and it's something I often encourage patients. Hey, if you don't want to go to, one of the various anonymous groups in person, try online first. But it is where some of the best support, as we all know, is in person.
Yep,
Uh,
absolutely. Both ways help,
now,
yeah, but in person is special.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the relationship between gut health, brain health, and SSRIs. SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, are one of the most common medications that are prescribed. 1 in 4 women over the age of 50 is taking an SSRI. They're much maligned, demonized, and I think there's a lot of misinformation about them. These are the medicines like Zoloft and Prozac and Paxil and Lexapro, and
Mhm,
they're also the most commonly prescribed medications by GI docs for things
mhm.
like IBS.
Yep.
And everyone loves to trot out the statistic: the majority of serotonin in your body is in your gut. People fail to mention it really doesn't have anything to do with the serotonin in your brain, but kind of take this as somehow an indication that some people in the wellness community are like, this means we have it all wrong. So to get to the shorter question, can you tell us a little bit about your opinion and experience of medications like Zoloft, and when people go to the GI doc and get that recommendation, maybe how you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the gut brain axis is an extremely complex bidirectional relationship that we're just really, again, learning about and clarifying, I think, in research over the past few years. And specifically in gastroenterology, I mean, this is very new, but it is absolutely exploded again in the past couple of years. I mean, if you were to ask a gastroenterologist 20 years ago, right, I don't think anyone would ever think about prescribing anything other than bentyl and dicyclomine or hyoscyamine to just stop spasms in the gut. And now, when you look at all our guidelines, those medications have been taken out, and now SSRIs, SNRIs, TCAs, all the different central neuromodulators have replaced them in these guidelines, and also things like peppermint oil, which is nice. But yeah, specifically, they do play a very important role in basically healing the connection between the gut and the brain. And the idea is this: it's that, there is a condition called IBS, right? Irritable bowel syndrome. And again, we hear this condition used all the time. We hear this diagnosis all the time, but in most of the instances, it's actually used incorrectly, right? So, what irritable bowel syndrome is, and this is by the Rome criteria, this is kind of the academic way of really diagnosing it, is it is a disorder of the gut brain interaction. We call them the DGBIs, right? So it's a very specific condition, right? And it is pain that's associated with bowel movements, either in the frequency or the consistency of the stool. It's very specific, and it is that way because it has so much to do with the nerves, right? It's pain, it's visceral hypersensitivity. It is your gut and your brain having a disconnected communication, so that where 20 years ago maybe you were eating gluten and you were just fine, and now you're eating gluten, and even that little bit of distension and bloating that you may have from processing gluten, which is a difficult to digest grain, now your gut is feeling pain. So there is, again, between the central nervous system and the enteric nervous system, there is a disconnect. And so what the research has, been leading to recently is that using from our, from again, our aspect is using like SSRIs, which, as you said, yes, there's a lot of serotonin in the gut, but it's really just, it's used in the gut. It's the motility, it's the motility neurotransmitter of the gut, which most people also don't think about, right? That's how our gut moves. So yes, of course
No,
it
I think
is.
most people think it's like, oh man, my gut's got the happy chemical down
Right.
there. And that's like good gut health. I make more happy chemical. And I mean, in some ways, I think
Yeah.
it's not so much that people think that, but I think
Yeah.
that's often how it's presented by influencers,
Yeah, it is.
in a way that, and I think it's really important to remember that one, serotonin is not the happiness molecule. Serotonin is the homeostasis molecule. Serotonin is the molecule that controls so much: our gut motility, our sex drive, our appetite, our sense of hopefulness. I mean, there's a lot in there, our sense of security, how sensitive we are. So
Interesting.
it's a really great point that all that gut serotonin is really around motility, and that the medications are being harnessed really to affect gut motility and affect this um, mismatch or brain gut communication breakdown. I think what's really important, I hadn't thought about it like this, Elena, what's really important for everybody to maybe just consider for a second is how it's a dynamic process. In mental health, we talk a lot now about neuroplasticity, this idea that the brain grows and continues to grow. And I love this idea. It gives me a lot of hope. I'm sure in other episodes talked about BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, being this molecule in the brain that leads to brain growth and brain repair. And it gives me a lot of hopefulness about my brain and my patients' brains, that as we get better, it's not just, oh, we got the chemicals balanced. It's that the brain grew into this state that is healthier, or grew back into the state. And it also really strikes me with IBS, because this is what my experience, both personally with patients, have been. That's so frustrating. Is that, like,
Mhm.
excuse me, it comes and it goes,
Mhm. Yep.
right? Where you can just have horrible gut health. Reminds me almost sometimes of mental health, where it's like an anxiety disorder where we're doing great for months, years, and then it really comes back for some specific reasons usually.
Absolutely, right? And that's the key, is finding out what those are, and a lot of times they are mental health triggers.
What are the most common stories or symptoms, or say triggers, that you hear that cause people's IBS or bowel symptoms?
Sure. So, I mean, I would say the most common is probably food. And then within the food categories, right, are usually the high FODMAP foods. So I will always, say there's a caveat where, the high FODMAP foods are the ones that are highly fermentable by your gut. So they are more likely to produce more gas, more bloating. And if you eat enough of them, like if you eat enough Brussels sprouts, you will probably have a little bit of diarrhea, right? A little bit of a change in your bowel movement. So there is this big move now for this low FODMAP diet. And a lot of gastroenterologists, a lot of doctors are just putting patients on it because it kind of just is this easy, two word kind of suggestion that gets patients better in many cases. But what happens is that a lot of patients are left on this diet because it's helped them, and then they can't get off of this diet. So
Oh,
the
so it's
idea is,
lots of people. Yeah, so the idea is that these are they kind of almost like jet fuel? Like these fibers, man, the bugs really love them down there, and they chew them all up, but they make lots and lots of gas.
yeah,
And so
exactly.
usually we can handle them, or a healthy gut can handle them for a lot of people. But when we, let's say, have a gut bug or diarrhea, or maybe a lot of stress, and we're having IBS symptoms, that's when we want to cut down on these. Are there certain
Yep,
FODMAP foods that surprise people that, like I learned, like I think onions and garlic are on there. Oh,
absolutely.
yeah, which that would be hard for me, or pears. I like
Right.
pears a lot.
When they just had the Met Gala in New York City, right? They don't allow onions and garlic on the menu because so many people are sensitive to onions and garlic. So many people have GI issues, right? They are very
Now,
high risk.
does that, I think sometimes people hear that, especially in New York, and folks kind of like roll their eyes a little bit. Like, come on, like, yeah, that many people at the Met Gala have, an issue with onions and garlic. How do you think about this, expanded both interest, but maybe self-diagnosis, or just the expanded prevalence of this type of thing, where everybody's on a low FODMAP diet?
Well, I think that in the world that we live in, I think that it makes sense that so many of us develop gut issues by the time, you basically hit 30, right? By the time you're in
Mm.
your 30s, 40s, right? I mean, we accumulate so many insults, right? So it's kind of like there previously, right, in the 80s, where it was all about being formula fed, and then you were getting all your antibiotics for every single virus as a little kid, right? Then you're moving on to, again, the stress of real life, and as you're in high school, and like real anxiety and depression kind of setting in, acne coming in to play, right, being put on Accutane, all these medications, then drinking a ton in college. And so by the time you hit your 30s and 40s, you have sustained so much microbiome damage that, to me, it's not surprising that, again, these food intolerances that are associated with IBS are so prevalent, especially living in New York City, as we know, where the stress is everything is always kind of through the roof. And so when we talked about IBS as being a disorder of the gut brain interaction, but there is also a much deeper kind of view of what IBS is. And for example, I was just at Digestive Disease Week, and it's like an international gastroenterology conference, right? And they were looking at fecal transplant for IBS, and it worked. It helped people who had these chronic gut.
Whose poo do we get? Who has the happy poo that we? That's what I've been wondering. Like, how do you choose the donor poop? You know what I mean? Like kidney, you can tell, oh, that's definitely a healthy kidney, or but like, how do you know who has the healthy poop?
Well, I mean, so it's a really good question. They're called super donors, right? So people are screened now to be of this super donor class, and we should all aspire to have poop that is worthy
I
of
mean,
this distinction.
this is how I want to help the world. Like, it's like, where's Drew? It's like, he became a fecal super donor, and he's just been in Spain at the research lab, just saving lives, one microbiome at a time.
There you go. I mean, that's real. I think that, again, they do a lot of screening. I mean, obviously it's the background screening of literally, again, like how many antibiotics have you had? What kind of autoimmune conditions do you have? What's in your family history? Allergies, of course, are a huge one. What kind of immune system dysregulation do you have, as that's so connected with your, the health of your microbiome. And then of course they test for all the pathogens too. And yeah, and you get this amazing quality stool and it replenishes all these deficits.
Do you eat something beforehand? Like, do you eat sprouted lentils, like a little kombu, or I mean, I suspect they have a special diet, so you
You
get
better
this
be eating it
special.
afterwards, right? You better be eating it afterwards to feed these new bugs.
Yeah, well, wow, that digestive disease week does sound like a particular crowd. I don't want to get derailed on a tangent asking you about what you guys eat at your conferences, because there's a few more important questions I know everybody's wondering about. Um, I want to get into physical exercises for the gut just for a minute, because we often talk about food. You mentioned yoga. I also find sometimes when my tummy's upset, I'll rub it, and I'm just wondering if there are certain other exercises or yoga poses or self massage or heat packs, things that you recommend that just are kind of like good, healthy maintenance self care stuff for our gut.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, absolutely, there are yoga moves. There's actually a yoga move called the wind relieving pose that literally helps people if, you've had some, again, high FODMAP foods, right? Maybe you've had your fair share of Brussels sprouts, onion, garlic, and quinoa, and you are sitting there with all the feels in the stomach, all the gas accumulating, and those cramps. And so you can literally lay down and then lay down on your back and bring one knee to your chest at a time. And that's really kind of activating the side that you're compressing to help stimulate motility. And that's what really it comes down to, right? Your gut is a tube at its essence. And especially in some people, it's a very windy tube. And so a lot of times it's hard to get past certain curves. Gas accumulates behind these curves. And so that's where this massage, comes in, is you can literally massage and stimulate externally your gut to start moving things forward. You can stimulate peristalsis of your gut. And this is actually also, something that we now are seeing even with internal stimulation of your gut with the vibrating capsule that we use for constipation, right? Which is a pill that is not medicine. It just vibrates in your colon. So that tactile, stimulation stimulates motility, and again helps people if they're having, again, issues with bowel movements or gas or cramps.
So I'm just grinning. I'm just wondering, like, who proposed that idea for the first time and just got probably like laughed out of the room. And I was like, ha ha, my vibrating pill is now FDA approved. That's really. I did not know about that, but is that essentially the vibration stimulates the gut and gut motility? So, but it sounds like in terms of exercise, like a yoga pose on our back, the wind relieving pose. I've not ever heard that one introduced in my yoga class. So I've done spent a lot of time in yoga classes, but that sounds like a private one.
Yeah.
What about some other things like do you are there certain things that you have in your house as an integrative gastroenterologist that might be helpful for us to have, like a water bottle or heating pad or things like that, or certain teas?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, teas are definitely an important one. I think that, one of the most, I'd say two of the most important teas you can stock your pantry with are peppermint and fennel. So
Hmm.
peppermint and fennel actually have a a pretty decent amount of research behind them in, in standard conventional academic research, showing that they have properties. The polyphenols in those herbs have properties that calm the gut. They are muscle relaxants working on
Huh.
calcium. So they, again, like I mentioned before, in kind of old school gastroenterology, people would just give you medications, to help calm a gut when it was a little spasmodic after eating a certain meal. And now you can actually just have a nice cup of warm tea. So peppermint and fennel are the two kind of go-tos. Ginger is also great. It's really nice to keep like a root, right? You actually go to the grocery store and buy a root of ginger, and then you steep it in hot water and you make your own tea. So it, makes it kind of a stronger flavor. And you can actually use that after eating also as almost like a digestive, as something that will help naturally increase your motility, your upper GI motility, specifically in your stomach and upper small intestine. And so,
Mm.
again, will help move things along to help clear up again and any excess gas, belching, or bloating that can happen after meals.
Oh, that's great. So some teas, some exercises. Those all sound like great things for the recommendation in the sense that a lot of times we don't think about it, right? We are sitting there, we're bloated, we're wondering what we ate, and we don't go and have a little fennel tea or give ourselves a little massage or do a little yoga to relieve some gas. So
I was going to say just one quick one I needed to add in because I do think it's so key is taking a walk. That's it. It's so simple. It's so simple, but that really stimulates again digestion. So not even having to do a specific pose, Drew, but just being able to go outside and take a walk. If you don't move, your gut doesn't move. So actual movement will stimulate your gut to start digestion.
there's been a new development around eggs, choline, and TMAO. And it's left people confused. We're already confused about eggs. I'm sure everybody's listening is, omelets are delicious, but should we eat them? Should we be worried about the cholesterol? And then this new wrinkle comes out when we eat eggs, we make TMAO. And this sounds like some researchers really think this is what causes heart disease. Can you help us unpack this? What's going on?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really interesting subject, and it's actually been published in the New England Journal of Medicine by Dr. Hazen from, I believe, Cleveland Clinic. There's some real research about TMAO as a pro-inflammatory substance that can lead to increasing cardiovascular mortality and cardiovascular risk. So the idea is that choline or phosphatidylcholine dietary sources are really animal products such as eggs, such as meat, such as dairy. And so when you ingest this, your microbiome actually processes it and produces TMAO. So it's all through the microbiome. And actually studies have shown that, for example, if you take if you take antibiotics, then actually your TMAO levels drop because, again, you lose the microbes that are processing TMAO. So one of the questions I think that's come out around this research, so there are a couple things, right? So some of the research that has been done has looked at, well, is it, do all of them produce TMAO equally? Is it red meat and dairy and white meat and everything? And the answer is no. First of all, some of the specific studies show, for example, if you eat white meat, you do not produce as much TMAO as red meat. So first of all, there is a breakdown in some of the different animal substrates. But then the other research that has come out is that, for example, if you're eating mostly plants and then you occasionally have, again, any of these animal sources, then you are making much less. Like that one substrate of animal product will create so much less TMAO than if your microbiome is primed to make TMAO. And so it's like every day you're feeding it cheese, dairy, red meat and eggs, and then it's just your levels are just continuously high. So one thing to think about is if you eat mostly a plant-based diet, you will make less TMAO. And so you can still eat your eggs, go to have your Saturday brunch, have your eggs, but just don't eat eggs and red meat and all of those animal products every single day, because then you've created a microbiome that is more likely to produce higher amounts of TMAO. And then the other question, which is being studied, is it actually just really your microbiome, right? Is it really just all coming down to your microbiome? And again, if you have a certain microbiome, then again, you're going to make less TMAO, and a certain microbiome you're going to make more. So instead of only focusing on the substrate, on the egg, on the dairy, focus on your microbiome, and then you can have those things and it won't produce as toxic of a environment with TMAO.
Wow, it seems a little bit that's almost what some of the science is suggesting, that if you're mostly, if you're plant forward, plant based, which is, a lot of the Mediterranean diet, these traditional diets, getting a lot of calories from plants, or eating a lot more plants than the Western diet, standard American diet, that you're going to make less TMAO when you do eat the products that can lead to TMAO. So that's really helpful. And I think it's also the balanced perspective we need, because so often it's like, oh, never eat an egg because it causes heart disease, as opposed to what we emphasize in nutritional psychiatry, right? Let's think about your dietary pattern. If you're eating a steak every single day, or red meat is the main protein that you're eating, there are a lot of reasons we want you to diversify that. Like, I'd like you to eat some more wild salmon. We'd like you to think about some plant-based proteins like sprouted lentils and beans. But that diverse set of plants setting up the microbiome to minimize the productions of things like TMAO. Sounds like that research is going to be emerging. We'll pay attention to it. Maybe we'll get to check it back in with you. But thanks so much for that update, as so many of us are hearing about it and wondering what to do. I don't know how to ask this with a straight face, but as a gastroenterologist, does the way that farts and poop smell mean something to you in terms of what's going on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that this is also, being clarified in more recent research, but there's the idea of sulfur, right? And the overproduction of sulfur in the gut. This is definitely a newer concept, although there are old studies looking at the connection between sulfur and developing ulcerative colitis, for example. And now, as actually the newest type of SIBO, hydrogen sulfide SIBO, there's been a big boom in research behind the effect of sulfur overproduction. And sulfur specifically, as you would imagine, produces a very sulfuric smell of gas. Rotten eggs, as if you would. So there are people that will tell you they have excess gas, but there is no smell. And then there are people that will tell you that there is a specific rotten egg sulfuric smell, like if you're taking a shower in Iceland, because that's how the water smells there. Or some people just say it's like a putrid, rotting smell, and that is
Rotten eggs, I think
that's definitely the sulfur smell.
Other smells. So the sulfur, but you were going that there's a kind of rise, it sounds like, in hydrogen sulfide SIBO, and then that's one thing I think people notice when we eat eggs. But what is there something we should be paying attention to, or if it smells a certain way, that it means, oh, do this or don't do that, or something maybe diagnostic in there for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the smells, it might not be specifically rotten eggs or sulfur, but a very malodorous gas in general, in a lot of instances is a clue of severe constipation or, dysmotility. And so you think about it, the stool is just sitting there for a longer and longer time. When you have that stagnation, it's associated with different types of overgrowth and continued fermentation. And so there's just more and more of these gases being produced. And so I think that, one thing that I've definitely seen is, sometimes people are not in tune with the motility that they're having, right? They think maybe I have a bowel movement a day, I'm fine, I'm not constipated. But if you really dig deeper into it, if that bowel movement is, back to our Bristol stool scale, if it's a Bristol 1 or 2, those hard pellets, and if you have this absolutely, putrid smelling rancid gas with it, then that is definitely a clue that you need to act on that stagnation.
In stagnation, we're going to act on that. Sounds like walking more, drinking more water, eating more plants. It's kind of first initial moves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is absolutely the base. I would even say, just stop and examine what you are putting in your gut. These days, right, there are a lot of people also over supplementing, or, they're maybe taking a lot of calcium, or they're taking a lot of iron, right? And maybe there's a specific thing that you could even, stop, right? And that's causing, the constipation.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that, because I think so often, at least in my experience, medicines get blamed for side effects, and supplements get cited as the cause for benefits. And so a lot of times when people are thinking about supplements, like a calcium supplement or magnesium supplement, no, it's really healthy, really good and safe, and part of their wellness routine.
Yeah.
It sounds like not so much, that those supplements can cause different challenges to the gut.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that can, of course, come from, again, kind of this wellness world and all of the information that people are just bombarded with. Take this, take that, take this, not even for a specific reason per se, but for wellness, for vitality, for, longevity, right? As something that can't even be measured per se. And so people are starting to really take more and more supplements. And without someone on board, right? And I'm sure, again, you also see this because there's so many supplements for brain health and anxiety and depression. Without someone on board that can walk you through the right one. So, for example, calcium carbonate, really constipating. But if you take calcium citrate, much less constipating. For example, calcium carbonate is, if you have a history of kidney stones, a lot of times people are calcium oxalate kidney stones, sometimes people are careful with that, right? But if you have calcium citrate, it's not that big of an issue. So there's so many nuances where, again, if you choose to supplement, just make sure you're doing it with someone who can help you, guide through the nuances of supplementation.
It's just not as easy as more magnesium, more calcium, all good. That there's a lot of nuance to it, and it's something I do see all the time where people are on a lot of different things, and
Mhm.
it's not clear whether they've necessarily helped. A lot of times they haven't,
Yep.
but sometimes they have a bit, and it's also unclear sometimes the side effects. But thinking about it related again to gut health and how it might be affecting things seems just wise, especially if you're having challenges. Well, Dr. Ivanina, it's been such a treat talking with you. I want to end, though, thinking just a little bit about mental health and your experience as a physician and a mom and a gastroenterologist, of course, around mental health and mental fitness, and just things that now you mentioned yoga is one of them. You certainly, and everyone who follows you on Instagram sees all the great, healthy, super colorful, crunchy, plant forward food that you're always sharing, which is just awesome to see. But wondering in terms of your mental health and mental fitness and whatever you're comfortable sharing, what really makes a difference and kind of keeps you resilient and strong?
Yeah, so that's a great question because in this day and age, when there's so many stressors, right, coming at you from so many directions, it's so important to have things that help you cope with stress and be able to kind of calm all those cortisol responses. So I would say for me, probably number one is having the support, right, of good friends and family. So again, like we talked about community, I feel like the connections are so important. I think that we learn a lot about as we grow older, we get more isolated, and it's something that I think is only now being talked about by like our Surgeon General, right? And in general has been ignored, and is something, again, in all these other non-Western worlds, is something that's really practiced and maintained. So I think that one thing that helps me is having being able to be parts of different communities. I think another part is having, yeah, like a daily practice. So yoga is amazing. I love yoga. I can't do 90-minute yoga every day, but you don't have to, right? So I think that, even if you can incorporate something, I love to do is like a short yoga session in the morning, can really, even 20 minutes can make you feel so great and kind of just grounded. And then having like a short meditation practice. So again, like in, people's busy lives, I wish I could do 30 minutes of meditation or longer, but I find that my meditation practice usually ends up being about 5 minutes, maybe 10. And, sometimes using those apps like Headspace, Calm, specifically when going through gut symptoms. I think Nerva can be a helpful one, which is actually more like hypnotherapy, which
Hmm.
has been an interesting, another interesting new app on the market. And then I think that, things that and then again is very big in the wellness world, vagus nerve stimulation, right? Like I think that for me, the breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, the slow, deep breathing can be so important. And then the other things that really help me balance out, like being in nature.
Well, that's a list that we know and we love here, and I think core tenets of mental fitness and adapting this attitude, adopting this attitude rather of having to be more proactive in our mental health and mental fitness. And really, one of the root causes of where this podcast came from was just wanting to keep the conversation going, talking to a lot of experts who not just have specialized information, so many great tips in this podcast, from things we can do to get our gut moving, to foods to look towards, to helping me sprout my lentils. What an awesome kind of weekend goal.
Shortcut.
But really to remind us also that people are doing it like yourself, and that in enacting these values, we live a life with more mental health and more pleasure. And it's great to see all the creativity and all of the real positivity that you're bringing to the space. And I wish you all the luck at your Center for Integrative Gut Health in New York City. I'm wondering if you can leave us with a kind of final thought or mantra, mental fitness mantra for the coming days. It's Friday when we're recording this, but wherever you are, whenever this finds you, maybe leave everybody with something to inspire us around our mental fitness in the coming days, if you could.
Yeah, I think that for something that can be inspiring to people is, I think, what really can uphold your mental fitness and going into the summer, and make sure everyone overloads their calendars. There's so much stress, but like, make sure you say no. Make sure you have time for yourself. Make sure you don't overload yourself. Really find that beautiful balance of having community, having an active social life with seeing your kids, doing all those things, but also, again, being able to say no, being able to have your time, your yoga time, your meditation time, and your downtime, because it's absolutely key to have that balance.
Oh, I love that reminder. I think we all need that. We all value being busy and productive and, going fun places all summer. And that's great
Mhm.
stuff. But making sure that it's also a summer and a time where you're investing in yourself, and,
Yep.
and you're prioritizing that, and listening to the good example that Dr. Elena Ivanina sets for us. Well, thanks. It's been such a treat to talk with you. Thanks, everybody, again, for tuning in. Please share this episode, especially with anybody that you know. So many of our friends and family and in our community, so many folks are struggling with gut health. So please share this episode with anybody that you know is having some challenges. For some, I find really exciting and new tips, a few of them for me. So thanks so much for coming on, and everybody, thanks again for your time and attention. This is another episode of the Dr. Drew Ramsey podcast, and I'll see you all real soon. Thank you.